What's up, guys? My name is Daniel. I draw cards and turn them into 3D prints using HueForge, and I also do HueForge tutorials for all of you. Today, we're gonna do a video that's a little bit different. I'm gonna show you exactly how to make HueForges out of TPU.
You're elastic. Let's just see how elastic you are. Okay.
TPU is by far my favorite type of filament to use for HueForges just because it's so different from using PLA or ABS or something along those lines. But this video is going to be more about what is the use case. Why would you want to use TPU for your HueForges? And the whole goal of today's video is to inspire you guys to get out there and be creative with HueForge because it can be used for a lot more applications than just printing a really cool wall art piece. So without further ado, let's get into today's video.
This video is sponsored by Overture. When it comes to 3D printing, quality matters. That's why Overture is one of the most popular choices for 3D printing filament among creators. Engineered for consistency and precision, Overture filament delivers flawless prints every time. Whether you're printing HueForges, functional prints, or detailed design, Overture's wide range of materials ensure smooth printing and reliable results. They offer everything from PLA to polycarbonate and everything in between. If you're in need of affordable filament for your next 3D printing project, go check out Overture using the link down below in the description.
Let's talk about what printers you should use for your TPU HueForges. There are probably quite a few of you here that are very much apprehensive about using TPU because it can be such a pain in the butt to tune and to get it to print correctly. The number one requirement that I would say for any printer to print TPU is a direct drive extruder. It's such a headache to try to print TPU on a Bowden setup similar to like the Ender 3s and the Ender 3 B2s. Now, as far as what modern day printers that you should use, this is an A1 Mini. The A1 series has been great for me as far as printing TPU is concerned. The only real gripe that I have with the A1 and the A1 Mini is that you have to babysit your printer because with TPU, obviously you can't run it through your AMS or AMS Lite without any modifications. So you'll have to swap and you'll have to do pause by layer rather than using that more automatic style of printing with an AMS or an AMS Lite. But man, the flow calibration on these printers, honestly, I hope that this becomes a norm on every printer that is coming out in the future because flow calibration makes TPU printing so easy. So now let's talk about the printers that I primarily use for my TPU HueForges. If you've been a longtime subscriber, you have seen this purple printer behind me. This is a tool changer. This was my first Voron build ever. And literally the whole reason that I built it was because I was so tired of doing manual swaps on my A1 Mini and I wanted to do multicolored TPU. I also just wanted to build a Voron and I have a lot of really good friends that helped me along with this build. If you want to check out the wrap-up video for that printer, I will have a link to it here. But for TPU specifically, a tool changer is so nice at automating this process that just having this printer able to do TPU HueForges is so nice, and it's a lot bigger, so I can do a lot more crazy HueForges for you guys. Now look, I understand that it's not feasible for most people to build a stealth changer, especially just for HueForges. But since I have been doing TPU HueForges on the Voron, now we have a new kid on the block. This is the new Snapmaker U1 that is coming to market. Seriously, I have been throwing everything that I can at this printer as far as wet TPU, different durometers of TPU, trying to get this thing to clog up or to cause me failures or issues, and I cannot. It has taken the best parts of the A1 and the A1 Mini in flow calibration and combined that with something like a Prusa XL to make a beautiful tool changer that just works. So basically what I'm trying to say is that any 3D printer that has flow calibration will help you immensely whenever you are doing TPU HueForges. It's one less thing that you have to tune, and it can compensate for if there's a little bit of moisture within that TPU. So that's basically my recommendations as far as 3D printers are concerned. Anything that is either a tool changer or anything that has flow calibration will help you immensely in this process. But again, as long as you have a direct drive extruder printer, you will probably be fine. You just have to do a little bit more tuning than other people that have that automatic flow calibration that make it a little bit of an easy mode. All right, so here's what I have for today's projects. I have this flat brimmed hat. On the bottom of it, it is completely flat. So this should be really simple to put a HueForge on. This is gonna be kind of a pain to sew a HueForge in, but I was talking to Ben Pendergast and he had this idea to put one here so that whenever you're wearing it, or so whenever you're wearing it, you can see underneath it, especially for somebody that's tall like me. So we're gonna try to customize this as best as we can. And then I also have this coin purse. Now this one should be pretty simple to make a HueForge in the shape of this and then sew it in. But I've also got some fabric glue that I wanna try out. I have never tried out using glue with TPU on some fabric. So we're gonna see how well that does. And so the final thing that we are gonna do today, I wasn't sure if we were gonna get to it just because of time constraints and stuff like that. I wanted to get this video out there for you guys, is textile 3D printing. So I got a bunch of these textiles from Kaizen 3D Prints. Daniel over there has a sample pack on his shop of like a bunch of different kinds of textiles that you can play around with. And he also sells individual ones, I'm pretty sure. So I went to his shop and grabbed some of these, and we're gonna mess around with this today. I've never done any kind of textile printing at all. And let me explain to you what you do with this textile. So basically what you're gonna do is you'll print 1 to 2 layers on your bed. You'll insert a pause so that the printer will pause. You put this textile down on top of that print, and then you hold it down with magnets. That is my understanding of what we're gonna do today. So we're gonna take a HueForge, and we're gonna take a repeating pattern of some hexagons, and then we're gonna cut those hexagons out of that like a cookie cutter. Then we'll do HueForge as normal. What we're gonna do is in the slicer, I'll show you how we're gonna do this, but we're gonna print 1 or 2 layers of that TPU, and then we'll put this on top of it, and then we will hit play, and we will continue the HueForge, and it should turn out really cool. If this is something that interests you in doing textile 3D printing, I will have a link to Kaizen 3D prints down below in the description. Daniel is a freaking mastermind when it comes to this. Like, he does a bunch of really cool stuff. He has a bunch of short form content on it as well, so definitely go check him out. And then he also, like I said, he has sample packs of all this stuff. So if you want to just try it out, it's like 20 bucks to get a bunch of different samples and to kind of play around with it. So definitely go do that. But I'm excited because this has been something that I've wanted to try for a very long time. And so this is going to be very cool. But anyways, this is going to be a pretty long video, so let's go ahead and get into it. I've got to design everything for the coin purse and the hat, and then we got to get into HueForging. So let's go ahead and get into it. Now, since I have kind of gone down the TPU HueForge route and done a bunch of short form content for it, people have suggested ironing on these TPU HueForges. Personally, I don't have an iron at home to test this out, and I don't know that I would feel comfortable doing that because TPU can be kind of nasty whenever you start to actually burn it. Hey Siri, what happens when you burn TPU? When burned, it decomposes and reacts with oxygen in the air, producing heat, flame, and various toxic byproducts. Will this happen if you melt it at high temps? So it says if you overheat TPU, there is a medium to high risk of toxic fumes. So it's risky to iron on any kind of TPU. Like I said, I personally don't have an iron to even test this with, so we're not gonna test that today. So before we even get into HueForging, I need to take pictures of each of these items, and then I need to use them as a reference in Shaper 3D so that I can model out a perfect shape so that we can actually cut out the HueForge later on with stitch holes. If you try to run a needle through 2 or 3 millimeters of TPU, it will probably break the needle, and I just would rather model in using like the hybrid method, and I'll have a video here. It's gonna be the same method that we used whenever we were making bookmarks. So we're gonna take the model that we make from this reference, and we are going to actually cut out the HueForge to that, and that model will have different holes for the stitching that we're gonna use. And that's just to make it easier on ourselves. Again, I think that you'll bend a needle or potentially break one, and I just don't wanna run into that at all. The more that I take pictures for reference on the hat, the more that I want to use my 3D scanner to actually scan the entire hat so that I can just have that shape as reference. I think that that's what we're gonna do. This hat was purchased at Hobby Lobby for super cheap. I think it was like $3, $4. So if you're planning on using blank hats and then putting your own designs on these hats, this will work for those really cheap hats that you have at Hobby Lobby if you wanna sell at craft shows, or if you just wanna make a hat yourself, that's where I got this. So yeah, I'm gonna break out the scanner. We're gonna mess around with that. It's been a minute since I've used it. This is my old trusty, dusty Raptor scanner from Creality. What we're gonna do is we're going to scan the hat. That way we have a exact reference for Shaper 3D so that I can make a more accurate shape. And because the hat is such a simple object, this shouldn't take me too long to scan, but it'll help me in the long run design, that's for sure. All right, so we have our little dots placed all over this. We have our scanner, and then I'm gonna get into Creality Scan, and we'll go ahead and start scanning this in for good reference. All right, so we have switched gears over to Shaper 3D. I have imported the scan that we just took of the hat, and we are going to trace out the brim. We'll extrude it, and then we will do a test print just to see how well it'll fit onto the hat's brim.
if we need to make any adjustments. I'm just going to show you what I'm doing within it, and we'll do a time lapse of it, and we'll do a time lapse of the coin purse, and then we will move over to the slicer. We'll slice it up, and we will send both test prints to make sure that, you know, we want to do a test fit of these models before we actually put a HueForge on them and waste filament there. So I will go ahead and do the time lapse here, and then I will meet you in the slicer.
This is a really good time to talk about drying your TPU. It is super important that you dry your TPU, especially when you're doing 0.08 layer heights, 0.04 layer heights, anything smaller than 0.2, because it will show a lot worse if it's wet whenever you're doing HueForges. So you'll see a lot more stringing, you might have some clogs going on, you might have retraction issues. So just be aware that if you were going to do HueForges, go ahead and dry your filament the night before. Just make sure that it's dry, because it will cause issues. The machines can only compensate so much for wet TPU. Point in case. So this TPU was on the U1. It's been sitting on this out in the open in my environment, and so it's just absorbed a lot of moisture. Now for me, you can see behind me, these two racks are my TPU racks. They're out, they're in the open. My apartment sits at about 60% relative humidity at any given time. And I leave these out for, you know, decoration, for videos and stuff like that. But for you at home, you really need to dry it, and you really need to store it in something like a plastic bag with the desiccant. For me personally, if I'm gonna be doing HueForges, I already know that I'm gonna be drying this filament. Whether or not it's in a bag, I have other TPU that's sitting off in other areas that are in bags, but I already have the mindset that I'm going to go ahead and dry TPU. So just make sure that you do that. And yeah, the hat print clogged up on the U1. This is the first time I've ever had TPU clog up on the U1. That's my fault. That's not the printer's fault. That's my fault for sure. But overall, the hat design came out really good. The coin purse design fits really well. I just need to adjust it just a hair, and then I need to add all the stitch holes for the hat. And then we also need to still do the repeating pattern print that we're gonna do for the textile stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. We'll do a time lapse. All right, so these are our models that we're going to use to cut out our HueForges like a cookie cutter. We have our coin purse STL. This is one we're going to sew in. This is one that we're going to glue on just for a test. These are our two hat brims, and then this is our geometric shape for our textile print. Now, I've already generated all 5 HueForges that we're going to use today. Now I need to flip this over onto its face. Since I modeled it off of the top, I just want to flip it over so that we have one for the bottom as well. I'm only going to go over how to do this one time with one of these models. I have an entire video that goes a little bit more in depth, but we're only going to do one cutout, and then I'll do the rest off camera and start printing. All right, so while I'm doing this, I tend to make the HueForge a different color than what we're cutting to. Now, this one is obviously a little bit smaller than it needs to be. We can scale it. As long as you turn off uniform scale and you don't adjust your Z, you can come out wider, you can come up taller, whatever you want to do as far as getting the scaling right for your particular HueForge. Ideally, you would want to do this in HueForge, but this is a workaround that you can use. So yeah, so we will
do it this way. And then what we are going to do is we're going to select both items and we are going to assemble them. So let's go ahead and we'll grab the HueForge and we'll grab the thing. So you can see here on plate 2, we have both of them selected. We assemble them. That will turn them into this assembly. And then we will click on both of them and we can come up here to Mesh Boolean. Whenever we come up to Mesh Boolean, it's going to ask us if we want a union, difference, or intersection. We'll go to intersection. We're going to click on the HueForge and then we'll click on the hat and then we'll do an intersection. Now the slicers don't love this, and right now it's acting as if it's going to crash, but just give it a second. The reason that I didn't load in all 5 HueForges is because there's a lot of triangles and a lot of geometry there, so it just wouldn't be ideal when the slicer already struggles to do stuff like this. All right, so this is what it looks like whenever it's done. You can see here that the HueForge is cut out perfectly to the shape that we had. You can do this with any kind of STL that you have at home, but for this sake, we're going to be sewing this in, so we wanted to, have it the same shape as the brim of the hat. Now, if you have a HueForge that is thicker than 5mm, same thing, you can come up to scale. You make sure uniform scale is turned off, and then you just scale Z. So if you have a thicker HueForge, maybe a color match or something along those lines, that's just chonky, then you can absolutely scale these up. And that goes for just about everything that you would want to cut out. Now we'll get into the slicer and I'll show you how we're going to set up this particular model. This is going to be a little bit different. This is going to be our textile print. We're going to cut out that repeating pattern out of this. And in HueForge, your base layer is set to 0.16 by default. So what we want to do is 0.24. We want to increase our base layer to 0.24. That way we have a better chance of that mesh adhering. So what we'll do is we'll print the first layer, then we'll put the mesh down, the textile down, and then we put magnets on the build plate and then print over top of it. So we want that base layer to be a little bit thicker. That way it just can adhere to the second layer a little bit better. And for this, I'm going to increase our base thickness altogether. And then we'll do a height range modifier so that those first few layers will be printed at 0.24. So for this, we're going to do 0.96 for our base thickness in total. That way we can do 4 layers at 0.24, and then we will get into printing the HueForge. And then that way we just have the best chance possible, because we might even print out the base layer and then the second layer and then lay the mesh down and then print on top of that. I don't know, I haven't experimented with this, but I think that I would rather try that first just in case. But you might be able to get away with just doing your first layer and then putting the mesh down and printing on top of it. I don't know, we're gonna do some experimentation. This is the first time I've done it, so we're gonna learn together. But I just wanted to point that out so that if you are doing this, it's very important to make sure that you have your base layer set a little bit thicker. And then that way you just don't have issues whenever you're printing with this mesh on top of it. So yeah, so let's go back over to the slicer. I'll show you how we're going to cut this out and then how we'll set up height range modifiers. So same concept, we are going to assemble these two and then we will select both, and then we will come up here to Mesh Boolean. We'll go to intersection. We're going to click on both of them, and then we will do an intersection. So now that we have both of our objects, let's go ahead and we will turn off. Let's go ahead and we'll delete this one, and you can see here that now we have our entire HueForge. So this is going to be interesting to say the least. This already looks wild. So again, we have our base layers. We have 0.96 before we even start doing the HueForge. So let's go ahead and we will set up our height range modifier for those. If you find yourself in the preview tab, you won't be able to use height range modifier, so just make sure that you're in prepare. So we're going to do 0 to 0.96. That's going to be 0.24. And we'll do 25% infill, and we'll keep it on 2 walls for that. And then above that, we'll do HueForge spec, so 100% infill, 1 wall. So that looks good. Strength looks good. We'll change it to gyroid from crosshatch. So now we have our assembly here with that height range modifier. So that basically we're telling it that everything in between 0 and 0.96 is going to print at 0.24 layer heights. So that should be good. Now when you do this, Your described text is going to be a little bit different. So when you have your described text here, you're going to have to go off of what we have here. You can't go off of at layer 18. You're going to have to go off of, you know, what actual millimeters it is whenever you go to slice this. Otherwise, it's just going to mess up, because now we've physically changed it, because this described text is based off of it thinking that, you know, we just have a base layer of 0.24 and then everything after that is 0.08. Whereas we just changed it to where now everything from 0 to 0.96, that's 4 layers. So it's going to change everything completely. So just make sure you're in prepare whenever you're trying to do the height range modifiers, and make sure that you go off of the actual, the height whenever you are doing your swaps. So, or your pauses, whichever one you're doing for your printer. So here, if we come down to layer 2 at 0.48, we will have, you know, just our first 2 layers printed. And then here we can right click and we can add our pause. And that pause is going to be when we add the textile, and then we'll add the magnets to keep the textile down, and then we will hit play and it will go on to print, you know, all the way up. But yeah, let's get these 4 printing, and then for the actual textile print, I'll show you a little bit more about what we're going to do there, just so that you can see, you know, putting the material down and resuming the print. So I'll go ahead and do that, and we'll get into the montage. So as you can see here, we are paused, and I'm gonna move the Z up so that I have room to actually do this. And then once I get the textile down in the way that I want to, then we will put all of the little magnets everywhere and get it stretched out pretty flat. Then we will hit play and we will see what happens. Worst case scenario, the magnets come off or they get knocked off or it's something break. You know, we're not gonna talk about worst case scenarios, we're gonna talk about best case scenarios, and best case scenario is this thing is gonna look epic. That's what's gonna happen. So let's get into it. This is something I've never done. Like I said before, this is the first time I've ever tried this. These are the magnets that we're using. These are, I think they're N52s, but they're smaller. These are what I've used for like my Voron and for other 3D printed parts in the past, whenever you gotta put magnets into your print. Kaizen specifically says that you should use the flat rectangle magnets to hold this stuff down. That way you have more control to stretch it without having to worry about potentially ripping the textile. We're not gonna do that. I don't have any of that. Anyways, now I forgot to mention that we were gonna use this black textile for this. There's different woven patterns that you can have for different properties, and Kaizen did a really good wrap up on what kind of textiles you wanna use and what kind of patterns for that. I am still very ignorant in that regard, so we're just gonna pick out a black that he sent me. He also sent me some skin color, which would be better for something that we're gonna wear, but this is just gonna be a proof of concept print today, so I think that just using a black to blend it in would look really good. So I'm gonna lay this flat over the top of it, and it looks like it hangs off just a little bit, so let me actually, I think that the best approach to this is we're gonna put the magnets down first, and then we'll trim the edges off. So yeah, so let me
we'll go ahead and we'll start grabbing some of these magnets. And honestly, I'm gonna try to put them in a little bit closer to the print when I'm first putting them down, and then because we'll need to stretch out the textile just a little bit, so the magnets will move away because we're using these really small magnets. I don't want to get too crazy with them, but at least that's my thought process here. Again, super ignorant, literally the first time I ever tried this. So I think that that's like an excessive amount of magnets, but let's see. The magnets will at least hold it in place for the most part where we'll want it. And that way it's completely flat here. And it already looks to me like we're doing a pretty good job. Sorry, my arm's in the way of the camera. But we'll try our best to get it as flat as possible. And that looks pretty good where it's at. I still feel a little bit here, so we're gonna pull it out just a little bit. Try to get out all the small wrinkles and everything and make sure that it's pulled tight. That feels pretty good. Or just a little bit more. And I think that we are ready to start laying down that next layer on top of it. So it's kind of hard to see with black on black, but I think that everything looks good. It looks pretty flat and even. I'm gonna go ahead and trim off these edges just because, so that it doesn't potentially get caught whenever the bed is slinging back and forth. I don't think it necessarily will, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Okay, so the textile's cut. Everything looks good. We are going to hit play and cross our fingers that everything goes well. That's the plan. That's the plan here. I know how to do everything else I've shown in today's video, but this is nerve-wracking. Trying new things, it's always nerve-wracking. So we got through our first pass over the textile without any real hiccups. Everything looks like it turned out pretty okay. So we're gonna do another layer of 0.24. We'll call that our finishing layer. That's like the rest of our base layer before we actually start the HueForge. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove all the magnets off the bed, and then it should pause whenever it is ready for me to swap out to the next color to start the actual HueForge. I did a really simple HueForge for this first attempt, and I think that it will come out pretty good, but I am excited to see. So I'm going to come back whenever we get to our first swap. So I went ahead and swapped over to our neon magenta, and everything looked good on the black layer. So I'm gonna let this finish out printing, and then when I come back, we will have a finished result. This turned out freaking awesome. Let's see if we can get it off the plate in one piece, and we'll see how well this actually holds up with the fabric underneath it. Okay, so we got it off in one piece, kinda. There are definitely some pieces that may have ripped. Honestly, a lot of this ripped. Now, here's the thing, okay? This is my first attempt with textile, and secondly, I'm like 92% sure that this is the wrong fabric, that I should have used a different fabric. I think that this is the Infinity fabric that he had sent me. The other stuff I'm pretty sure is stronger than this, and so when I was going along and trying to get it off in one piece, it didn't work out too great. But luckily, I designed this model with these wider channels so we can go through and we can make the best of this, and I'm gonna show you exactly what I mean by that. This is just a proof of concept print, but while I was failing miserably at getting this off in one piece, which it bends a little bit, I found that because I have those channels, I'm able to cut straight through them. You can see it pretty clearly here that we will have enough space to cut through, and then we can make something like a ring with these. That was the best that I could come up with. So we are going to go along with it, and we will see how well it turns out. So out of that entire thing, we have 4 strips that came out in one piece. That's how bad it was when I was going at it with a razor. But I still wanted to show you guys that, you know, I'm not perfect. This is the first time that I've tried it. So don't be afraid. Even if you mess up the first try, keep trying. And honestly, I think that the ring idea has some legs, but like, this is just not gonna work out for me because it's already in some areas, it already has cuts. So when I go to try to like fold it on itself, it just doesn't work out. But there's something I didn't show you. This is a UV flashlight, and I at least use UV reactive TPU on these. So, you know, it's not all bad, I guess. That's the coolest part of this part of the project. So, but let's talk about the key takeaways from this, because I did learn a lot just from doing these prints. If you're gonna do a repeating pattern, don't do really tiny repeating patterns. Do something with a large surface area. I'm pretty sure that you could get away with it with something more like PLA that will actually just like come off of the bed. But because I had to really scrape at this, it just caused a lot of issues. So that's okay. I still wanted to show that it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to have these problems. That's all part of 3D printing and iterative design. So anyways, now that we have gone over the textile part of this, I have to actually sew in the other patches into the hat and into the coin purse. So I'm gonna do that. So we'll see how that goes because I have just as much experience with sewing as I do with textile printing. I don't know why I bit off this video. Honestly, I could have just probably printed a TPU HueForge and called it a day, but I was like, you know what, we're gonna go down a rabbit hole. And here I am down a rabbit hole. So we're gonna try to hand sew. Man, I hope that goes better than this did. Also, another reminder, go check out Kaizen 3D Prints because he is the expert. He knows what he's talking about and he knows what he's doing. So if you want to do textile, that's who you need to watch. That Daniel, not me, that one. That one knows what he's talking about. I think it's like it's week 3, that's for sure. I've been working a lot off and on these TPU HueForges, and oh man, it has been like problem after problem. And the problems aren't coming from the TPU HueForges necessarily, it's coming from the fact that I am not a seamstress. Basically what has happened, I got some thread, I got some needles, and so I was going to stitch in the HueForges into the hat brim, right? So that was the plan. We were gonna stitch them into the hat brim. And when I went to do this is completely my fault. I should have looked this up. Most of the time, these are plastic brims. And so, yeah, you know, hand stitching with a small sewing needle, impossible into something like this. And then it was like, well, okay, so maybe I can just get it underneath the first, you know, layer of fabric. No, I tried several times. I even made this really janky curve needle to see if that would help the process. And it did help, but it wasn't perfect and it just wasn't ideal. So I didn't want to break any more needles. I think I'm up to a total of 7 broken needles across the hats and the coin purse. Now the coin purse we'll talk about here in a second. But anyway, so what I want to do for the hat is I was on another live stream with Ben Pendergast not too long ago, and Gemini and Cookie Cat, and we were all talking about this idea. I showed him, and what Ben had suggested was, especially for somebody at a market, to have a hot swappable brim. And the reason that you would want to do that, maybe you have like, you know, we have our base black hat, and you are selling these brims to people at these shows. So maybe you have, you know, a different color scheme, a different outfit for different colors of HueForges. Like this one is a yellow color scheme, a more bright yellow versus the other one that we did, which is more of a red and pink color scheme. So it's like maybe for different outfits that you have, maybe it makes sense to, you know, switch them around. What I had started thinking about, they had suggested, you know, modeling up some kind of like clip or something to go into the brim to hold these down, but I don't know how well that would work just in the long term, even in the short term, to be honest, because if one of those clips breaks while you're out and about, that would be a really feel bad moment. So I was thinking of using Old Reliable. Velcro is super easy to work with. It's also very cheap, and you can get through it really quickly. And if something falls off, if it gets peeled off just a little bit, it's super simple to put right back down, or you can glue it back down if it comes off of the HueForge or if it comes off of the hat. So I feel like if you were going to be selling these at a market or something along those lines, that would be a more reliable solution than having a 3D printed clip. Because if you have a 3D printed clip, somebody buys this and then they break the clip, or it's a really hot day and maybe you made them out of PLA or something, then they don't have a 3D printer. So that's just my mindset behind it. Obviously, the most ideal solution for this is to have a heavy duty sewing machine with a heavy duty sewing needle and not do this by hand. Again, I am not a professional when it comes to sewing at all. So now we have stuck them onto the brim of the hat on the top and the bottom. Again, sew it in if you can. If you can't, this is a good workaround, and I think that this is just a cool idea in general. Now, there's something that I didn't show you guys yet. Let me show you. And you can see that I used Overture's UV reactive TPU for the top HueForge. I used some of their neon stuff. This stuff is super cool. They have all kinds of TPU, like I was saying in the beginning. They definitely are like the biggest supplier of colors and styles of TPU. I also used some glow-in-the-dark TPU that they have. This is a luminous pink for the bottom. You can see that it's coming through a little bit. I just need to charge it for a little bit longer. But it's still a very cool way to add a little bit more to your HueForges, is to use some fancier style filaments like the neon or the glow-in-the-dark stuff that they offer. So basically what I'm saying is, don't be afraid to use different styles of filaments, like glitter filament or glow-in-the-dark, neon, whatever you can find out there, metallic. So we tried that fabric glue first, and I think that it worked relatively well, considering we're just gluing this onto fabric. You know, I can put some pretty good force on it and it'll rip it off, so that is unfortunate. But I mean, the more you use with this stuff, the better it adhered, and I'm still pulling it pretty hard. I'm not just like showing you here. And it stuck. I just don't know how well of like a permanent solution this would be. Maybe if you like really lathered it on, it would work well, but I'm not sure as far as like selling it as a product, how well that would work. So just buyer beware when it comes to using glue. It can be used, and in a pinch or like for a cosplay or something along those lines, I think it's totally fine for a quick, easy solution. But obviously, I think sewing is the best way. You can see this going around the edge. This is all sewn in. So story behind this, I broke 2 needles trying to sew this in as well. Stop laughing at me. So this should have been way easier than the hat. Like there's no insert or anything like that. You should just be able to, you know, put a needle in and sew it. So I got my girlfriend to help me out with this because she is way more talented at making stuff. She does jewelry and all this other stuff. I think that obviously for a permanent solution, sewing it in and stitching it in is just like by far the best solution. And it's not difficult for people that have done it before, and I think that if you haven't sewn before, hand stitched, I think that, you know, practice makes perfect along with anything, just like HueForge in general. So overall, I think that the coin purse turned out good. Now, the only problem is you can see that this white is super opaque. Let me see if I can turn off the lights. I want to show you something. I wanted to show you guys that we used that neon orange from Overture, so it has that blacklight effect or that UV reactive effect. And it looks really cool whenever you have a more opaque filament on top, because it just lights up that white underneath. It doesn't make it super overpowering orange coming through. So that is why I wanted to use that more opaque white. You just have a bright blue pink color on top of this really bright orange. So I think that this looks really cool. It's just that whenever we're out in the light, it's super, super opaque. So that's gonna be a style decision for you, but I still wanted to show you guys the UV reactive TPU. So with that, we are basically done with today's video. I have scanned a hat and I put some HueForges on it to give it a little bit more customization. Huge shout out to Ben Pendergast for giving me this idea. I think that this is a very cool use case for HueForge in general, just to put some custom artwork, whether you have generated that or you maybe do digital art yourself, and putting that onto a hat like this. There's also, you know, being able to sew into a coin purse or glue onto a coin purse. Again, I would say that, you know, sewing it in is better, but there's also the option of gluing that is quicker and easier. And then textile 3D printing, Kaizen 3D prints. Dude, the dude is a magician when it comes to this kind of stuff. Go check his channel out. Again, I'll have it in the description. This is such a cool way of mixing two different mediums to make something new. I want to do a little bit more practice with this kind of printing. I think that with a little bit more practice, I can get this down a little bit better, especially with the help of his videos. And again, with this video, this was more for inspiration and to show you guys some projects that I have heard people wanting to use HueForge for. I wanted to just kind of put them all together in one video so that you guys could see a few different ways that maybe somebody would want to use TPU within their workflows. I hope that showing you some of the failures that I ran into and some of the trials and tribulations will help you in your journey. If you wanted to try out making a TPU hat HueForge or using that textile 3D printing, you know, I'm not afraid to show failures and I'm not afraid to show some mess ups and some hiccups. I think that that helps everybody in general whenever I'm doing these kinds of videos. And it's super entertaining when that kind of stuff happens, even though it's kind of unfortunate, but it's okay. And I want to give a huge shout out to my Patreon members and my YouTube members. You guys are the best, and you guys are the reason that I am here doing this. Without your support, none of this would be possible. And a huge shout out to Overture for sponsoring today's video. I have a coupon code for them specifically so that you can go try out TPU for a more affordable price. I know that TPU can get a little bit expensive, so definitely go check that out. They have a huge variety of TPU. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I hope you learned something.